Today we're beginning with the origins of life, or I should say the possible origins of life, where all of this complexity in life came from. Now, it is chemistry heavy. I will expect you to remember some things from basic chemistry back in 101 about electrons moving, about bonding relationships, things like that. So sorry for making you delve back into your past. I do want to point out this is a story. Obviously, we don't know what happened billions of years ago. It's a story that makes sense, to me anyway. And it's a story that's backed up by a lot of experiments. What I'm going to tell you today could happen. It absolutely could happen. We have demonstrated it is possible for this to happen in the lab. That does not mean this is what absolutely did happen. Do you see the difference? So, it's a story. It's a story I'm going to tell you. And we'll see where it's going. So here's the deal. In order for life to happen, you have to have 4 distinct stages. You have to have nucleotides and amino acids. What do nucleotides come together to build? What? DNA, RNA. These DNA and RNA are usually used in the modern world for transmitting and storing genetic information. Amino acids, what are they good for? Proteins. And proteins, as we know now, do just about everything. They have this unique hierarchy of structure. They build these long polypeptide chains that fold up into a certain form, and that form gives them a function. So the first step is get those original monomers. The second step is, once you have the monomers, to polymerize them, to bind them together. Now, what kind of reaction? Oh, I might be asking too much of you, but see if you can get this. What kind of reaction polymerizes monomers? How do monomers come together chemically? Do you guys remember condensation reactions and dehydration synthesis? Did you ever hear of those? You're like, yeah, we've heard of them a long, long time ago. Okay, so here's the deal. Important for you to know the difference. Very important to know the difference. Hydrolysis reactions are going to break molecules apart using water. Water comes into the system, the molecule is broken apart. A dehydration reaction, 2 molecules come together and water is removed from the system. So if here's a chair that's an amino acid, here's a chair that's an amino acid. These are individual monomers. I would combine them together using a condensation reaction. I'm condensing them into a larger form. If water is added to this system, this macromolecule, it will split them. That's hydrolysis. Hydro is water, lysis is to break apart. Make sense so far? So what we need to do is have condensation reactions or dehydration synthesis to build these macromolecules. That's the second step. The third step, you've got these polymers now. You have to encase them inside of a membrane. They have to be surrounded by something, so you have an inside and an outside. And then the fourth step is those polymers, the enclosed polymers, the polymers in the membranes, begin to self-replicate. They take on cellular properties. So, here's the part you guys really wanted to know. These 4 distinct stages make an excellent essay question. Just saying. Don't worry, though. We're going to go through each of these stages in excruciating detail, going through each of the scientific experiments that showed how it's possible for them to happen. Stage 1. We need to get organic molecules. We need to get these amino acids. We need to get these nucleotides. Before we have cells, before we get to that level of complexity, you need that baseline level. So we need acetone, formaldehyde, hydrogen fluoride, methyl fluoride, boron trifluoride, methane, ammonia, and water. These are all what are termed organic precursors. You will not need to know them individually. But the idea is there are molecules that come in to build other molecules. So we have to get these organic molecules. At some point in the distant past, suddenly, poof, nucleotides and amino acids happened. Spontaneously. All by themselves, with nobody interfering with it. Now, this was possible due to the conditions of life on the early Earth. Now, we know what the conditions of the early Earth were because of, we can collect samples, we can do core sampling, where we dig deep down into the Earth, we kind of pull up a core, and you can test it to see what kind of gases were trapped there at the time. That gives us an indication of what was in the atmosphere. So we got to get these, go from those sort of pre-organic molecules to actual organic molecules. These are a list of all of the amino acids. Because before we had life, before we had anything that was self-replicatory, we had molecules. Now that's not hard to imagine, is it? I mean, no life, just a bunch of molecules hanging out. It's actually pretty much what we think most of the other planets are, don't we? I mean, you think about it, there's rocks out there. There are molecules going around. There may or may not be life. So without life present, without an organism devouring something and breaking it down, you don't have many, these prebiotic molecules, these pre-organic molecules aren't breaking down. They're not falling apart. They're not being ripped apart. So whatever is building these pre-organic molecules is allowing them to build up in higher and higher and higher concentrations. There's no oxygen around at this point. Oxygen is locked away in other molecules. Do you guys know anything about oxygen as an element? What does oxygen do to other elements? It's a chemical process named after oxygen. Oxidation, right? Oxidizes them. When you oxidize something, you steal electrons from it. Well, there's no free oxygen around. It's not stealing electrons from anybody. So these molecules that are being built remain built and stay stable. So eventually, all of these prebiotic molecules that are sort of falling into the oceans, hanging out in this solution, they form what's known as the prebiotic soup. I know, silly term, but that's literally what we call it, the prebiotic soup. It's the oceans filled with all these pre-organic molecules. So now I've told you a story, and I've given you absolutely no evidence for it. Pretty much I'm just like, hey, look, stuff happens. I'm never going to leave you like that. But do you understand the concept thus far? We have molecules forming. They are pre-organic. They are not yet organic molecules. They're about to become organic molecules. These molecules that are forming are hitting a substrate, a solution, the oceans. So you've got a bunch of these molecules just building up to higher and higher levels in the oceans. It's like, I don't know, any of you guys have a fish tank? Yeah, do you have a filter on it? Yeah, because if you don't have a filter, what happens? All of the fish feces and the nitrates, everything that the fish excrete, builds up and builds up and builds up. And if you don't filter it or change the water, they stay there. That's what's happening in the early Earth's oceans. You're just building up and building up and building up these molecules. So we get these molecules, or could get these molecules in one of three ways. A reducing atmosphere. When in doubt, it came from outer space, extraterrestrial, or deep sea vents. So the first hypothesis was a reducing atmosphere. By reducing, I mean the opposite of oxidizing. Instead of stealing electrons, this reducing atmosphere gives electrons. Now, the geologic record, like I said, from getting cores, examining the cores, figuring out what types of gases were trapped there from that time frame, we realized that the early Earth's atmosphere was primarily hydrogen, methane, ammonia, water, and nitrogen. Little bits of carbon dioxide, a little bit of hydrogen sulfide. That is very, very different from today's atmosphere of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water. So much so that you would have expected to see a completely different sky. Instead of having a blue sky, you have a green sky. Which is interesting, because instead of having blue oceans, we'll get into it later, you'd probably have sort of a reddish color ocean. So entirely different makeup of the Earth. And because of these particular elements, as they react together, they can form pre-organic molecules. The original evidence from this came from a guy named Stanley Miller, who was a college student. He was literally a little bit older than you guys, but not much. He came up with this idea that if you were to take the gases from the early Earth and put them into a sealed container and then run an electric current through it, you can simulate the conditions of the early Earth and see if you're able to form these molecules. Now, the electrodes in that sealed container represented lightning, because the early Earth's atmosphere with this particular mix of chemicals would have been very, very reactive. You would have had electrical storms, lightning flashes all the time. Now, why would lightning flashes be important? What does lightning have that would be conducive to helping form molecules? Not necessarily electron. Think broader. How about this? You guys remember? And I'm sorry, for none of you, wasn't your 101 instructor. So, what do all chemical reactions need in order to progress forward? Energy. They absolutely, sorry, did you say that? Yeah, okay. All right. You get the credit for it. Well done. Next time, just be louder. So, you need energy for these reactions to occur. Lightning provides a ton of energy. I believe what is it, 1.21 gigawatts? Do you guys know? I assume somebody's seen Back to the Future. But no, okay, that's cool. Sounds fine. 1.21 gigawatts, that's a ton of energy. That's enough energy to power the creation of a molecule. It takes two molecules and puts them together. You fuse them. After lightning strikes in today's atmosphere, have you ever been near a lightning strike? Yeah? Have you smelled the air afterwards? It smells totally different. That's because that O2 has been converted to O3. It's become ozone. Well, same thing was happening way back at the beginning of the Earth. So what Miller did was he has these electrodes in there sparking every second, just flash, 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 in this mixture of the different gases from the Earth's early atmosphere. As that happens, you're forming a condensate on the on the inside of that glass bulb. There's water forming on the edges. And in that water, you're going to have some dissolved molecules. Whatever's being created is dissolving in the water and then dripping down. It's going through this condenser, dripping down here, where that cool water collects. There's a sampling probe here to say, hey, what's in the water now? The water is then heated up, so the water becomes a vapor, leaving behind the organic residue, so those organic molecules that were made. As it heats up, it goes back into the atmosphere or back into the original tube, and you keep having these reactions. It's just like it's simulating the water cycle on Earth. Down here would represent the ocean. Over here would represent the evaporation. Up there's the lightning storm. What he ended up finding was that within 1 week, so 1 week of lightning flash, lightning flash, lightning flash, about 10% of all the carbon that was in the gases became fixed into organic molecules. He ended up getting those organic precursors forming just from lightning flashes. So we know this is possible. Now, obviously, in the early Earth's atmosphere, it wasn't lightning flash every single minute of every single second of every day. But over 1 billion years, you end up building up a lot of molecules. The big things he noted forming were hydrogen cyanide and formaldehyde, both of which sound really scary because we've heard of formaldehyde, and formaldehyde's bad. The upside is formaldehyde and hydrogen cyanide are actually absolutely vital to form amino acids. Now, I'm not saying go and drink formaldehyde. I'm saying they are precursors. You can use those molecules to very, very easily create amino acids. And by you, I mean something else you can't. Your body's not good at it. Other organisms can. But here's a big issue with this hypothesis. We've learned more since the 1950s, and what we realized was we were wrong about the chemical composition of the Earth's atmosphere. So yeah, the composition Stanley Miller was using would absolutely work, but it turns out modern evidence shows the Earth's atmosphere was probably a lot of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water, mainly from rock dust. Good news, though, this is where this works out. We don't have to throw out our original model, because it turns out if you alter the initial chemicals to these, to what we conceive of in the modern idea of what ancient Earth's atmosphere looked like, it still creates those organic precursors. They redid Stanley Miller's experiment, and you were able to reproduce crystallization of these organic molecules. So that is one way we can get an organic precursor molecule. It's possible. That's all I'm getting at here. Possibility number 2. It came from outer space. You'll find that as we talk about things, it came from outer space. It comes up a lot. What killed the dinosaurs? Giant asteroid came from outer space. What wiped out half of life during the Precambrian? I don't know. May have been a gamma ray burst nearby. There's all sorts of things where it came from outer space. In this case, there's a hypothesis that we could have gotten our original organic precursors from the late heavy bombardment, when we were being struck by a bunch of meteors. See, the deal is, meteors are made up of carbon, and they contain a whole bunch of organic carbon. The Earth was being hit a lot, much more so than it is now. There was the belief now is a world, what we would consider to be a world-destroying impact, so an impact that would wipe out all of life on Earth, was happening roughly once every 100 years back during this time frame. Life didn't get off the ground. It was kind of being wiped out whenever it started. But what we know is these meteors are coming down and crashing and leaving behind carbon residue. Because, like we said before, what do you need in order to form an organic molecule? What do you need to form any molecule? That's right, energy. I saw you move your lips that time, so well done. Energy. And as a meteor strikes the atmosphere, I guess at that point, yeah, meteor strikes the atmosphere, it starts to heat up. Heat is a measure of energy. It can use that heat, or when it's coming through, that friction creates enough energy to bind molecules together. Downside is when you collide, when you actually strike, that's a lot of physical force, which may in turn break the molecule. But the thing is, you're building up these carbonaceous molecules. And the third hypothesis is the deep sea vent hypothesis, in which organic molecules develop at the bottom of the sea. See, at the bottom of the sea, you've got these, the multiple plates are either coming apart or coming together. If they're coming apart, that's sort of leaving an open well through which magma flows up. That creates black smokers. These are going to produce a lot of heat. Obviously, it's water, so it's roughly 4 degrees Celsius water, striking absolutely beyond boiling, 700 degree, 1,000 degree magma, leading to jets and jets of whatever was dissolved in the magma shooting out of the vent. That's where you get the superheated water, energy, right? Lots of heat, interacting with metal ions and hydrogen sulfide. That super hot water then hits super cold water. That leads to a precipitant forming. That means whatever was combined together will come out a solution. Now you've got your organic precursors. The temperatures are higher than 300 degrees Celsius, higher than 3 times the boiling point of water. You have an extremely high pressure. You guys have been swimming before, right? You notice the farther you go down, the harder it is. Obviously, the harder it is to breathe because you're underwater. But if you're wearing like a mask, the farther you go down, the more that mask presses against your face. Imagine going to the bottom of the ocean. The pressure is so great there that it would absolutely crush your lungs. You wouldn't survive at all. If we can't send submersibles down to the absolute bottom of the ocean, unless they're very specially modified submersibles that go down that have any sort of air in them, because that air gets pushed. There's so much pressure against it that it crushes it up. It sort of implodes while it's underwater. That's a big fear for submarines. If they go too deep, the pressure gets too high. They can't go to the bottom and just sit on the bottom of the ocean. If they go too deep, they collapse inward. It gets crushed. So down there, we do have organisms surviving, surprisingly enough. Life finds a way. But those conditions turn out to be conducive to survival. Conducive to the formation of organic molecules. Hydrogen sulfide and iron, both of which are being pushed up by this flowing magma, can be converted into pyrite and hydrogen. You guys have heard of pyrite before? Fool's gold? This is ionized fool's gold. Pyrite and hydrogen are going to be important for forming ammonia. Ammonia is NH3. You need that H. Now there's a whole bunch of N2, nitrogen, spewing out of these vents. As that interacts with the hydrogen and the pyrite, you end up creating the functional groups that you need to build amino acids and nucleic acids. So it's possible to build the parts at the geothermal vents.